There are moments in life when everything you thought you knew collapses in an instant. When the world you've built, the person you've become, and the truth you've hidden all converge at a single point. This is a story about one of those moments. About a boy who had nothing but gave everything. About a woman whose life hung by a thread. And about a man who discovered that wealth can buy many things, but it cannot buy you peace when the past comes calling. How far would you go to save a stranger? And what would you risk if that stranger held the key to everything you'd spent your life trying to forget? In the heart of Lagos, where glass towers cast shadows over rusted tin roofs, two worlds collided on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. One world belonged to power and privilege. The other belonged to survival and hope. Between these worlds, a woman lay dying, and a choice was made that would unravel everything. His name was Chitty, 15 years old, though his eyes carried the weight of someone much older. He'd been living on the streets of Victoria Island for 3 years, ever since his mother passed, and the relatives who were supposed to care for him decided a hungry mouth was too heavy a burden. Every morning, he woke up under the Falomo Bridge, folded his cardboard bed, and walked the same route through the wealthy neighborhoods. Not to beg. Chitty had made that decision early. He would work for everything he got, even if that work was washing car windshields at traffic lights or carrying groceries for people who barely looked at his face. He had dignity, even if he had nothing else. And he had a dream, though he barely allowed himself to think about it anymore. He wanted to study medicine, to heal people, to matter in a way that went beyond survival. The dream seemed ridiculous when you were choosing between buying bread or saving money for soap. But Chitty had found a library that would let him sit inside during the hottest hours of the day. And there, surrounded by books he couldn't afford to borrow, he taught himself about the human body, about diseases, about life and death. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Okonkwo, noticed him. She never said much, but sometimes she'd leave medical textbooks on the table where he sat, opened to specific pages. Small kindnesses, the kind that remind you that you're still human, still visible, still worth something. Chitty lived for those moments. They were the light that kept the darkness from swallowing him completely. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, click subscribe so you never miss our upcoming stories. It happened on a Tuesday. Chitty was walking past the Eco Hotel when he heard the screaming. Not the usual city noise. This was different. Desperate. He turned and saw a black Range Rover stopped awkwardly in the middle of the road, its door flung open. A man in an expensive suit was shouting into his phone, his voice breaking with panic. And in the back seat, a woman was convulsing. Chitty moved closer. He couldn't help it. Something pulled him forward even as other people hurried past, uncomfortable with the scene, unwilling to get involved. The man was shouting about hospitals, about traffic, about how they'd never make it in time. Chitty looked at the woman. Her lips were turning blue. Her breathing was shallow, irregular. He'd read about this. Anaphylactic shock. Severe allergic reaction. She had minutes, maybe less. Without thinking, Chitty called out. He told the man to lay her flat, to elevate her legs. The man stared at him like he'd materialized from thin air. A street boy in torn clothes and worn-out slippers, giving orders. But there was something in Chitty's voice. Certainty. The man hesitated for only a second, then did exactly what Chitty said. Time was collapsing. Chitty made a choice. He climbed into that Range Rover, into a world that would never have let him in under any other circumstances. And he fought for a stranger's life with nothing but knowledge he'd stolen from books and a fierce determination not to let death win. If this story has your heart racing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The minutes that followed felt like hours. Chitty's hands were steady even though his heart was hammering against his ribs. He kept the woman positioned correctly, monitored her breathing, told the driver exactly how fast to go, what route to take. The man in the suit, who Chitty would later learn was named Mr. Obi, stared at him with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. When they reached the hospital, Chitty relayed everything to the emergency staff with a clarity that made them pause. This wasn't a random street kid. This was someone who understood medical terminology, who'd observed and acted with precision. The doctors took over, rushed the woman into emergency care. And Chitty simply stepped back, ready to disappear the way he'd always disappeared. Invisible again. But Mr. Obi grabbed his arm. Not roughly. Almost gently. He asked Chitty's name, where he was from, how he knew what to do. Chitty told him the truth. About the library. About teaching himself. About wanting to be a doctor someday. Though saying it out loud to this wealthy man made the dream sound even more impossible than it usually did. Mr. Obi went quiet. He looked at Chitty for a long moment, really looked at him. Perhaps for the first time seeing past the dirty clothes to the human being underneath. Then he did something unexpected. He asked Chitty to wait. Not outside, but in the hospital waiting room. As an equal. As someone who mattered. Hours passed. Chitty sat in that air-conditioned room, surrounded by people who lived in a different universe. And he waited. When Mr. Obi finally emerged, his eyes were red, but his face held relief. His wife, Adana, would survive. The doctors said that without the immediate intervention Chitty had provided, she likely wouldn't have made it. Mr. Obi sat down next to Chitty. He didn't say, "Thank you." Not right away. Instead, he asked a question that seemed to come from somewhere deep and complicated. He asked Chitty if he believed in fate, if he thought some meetings were meant to happen. Chitty said he didn't know. He said he believed in doing what was right when the chance came. Mr. Obi handed him a card with his personal number. He told Chitty to call him the next day, that they needed to talk. Chitty called the number. He didn't expect much. Wealthy people made promises all the time, didn't they? But Mr. Obi answered on the first ring. He invited Chitty to his home in Ikoyi. When Chitty arrived at the mansion, he felt like he'd stepped into a different country. The guards at the gate had been told to expect him. Inside, Mrs. Adana was recovering on a sofa, still weak, but alive. She looked at Chitty, and something passed across her face. Not just gratitude. Something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. Mr. Obi asked them to sit. What he said next changed everything. He told Chitty that he'd spent the last 24 hours thinking. About life, about choices, about the weight of the past. He said that seeing Chitty, this young man with nothing who'd given everything in that moment, had broken something open inside him. 15 years ago, Mr. Obi hadn't been the man he was now. He'd been ambitious, climbing his way up, making deals, making compromises. And one of those compromises involved a woman. A brief relationship, quickly ended when she told him she was pregnant. He'd been 25, terrified, convinced a child would destroy his future. He'd given her money, told her to handle it, walked away, built his empire, married Adana, created a new life where that mistake didn't exist. But it existed. It had always existed. He'd never known what happened, never followed up, never wanted to know. Until yesterday. Until he'd looked into Chitty's eyes and seen something familiar. Until he'd gone home and pulled out an old photograph he'd kept hidden for 15 years and compared it to the face of the boy who'd saved his wife. The resemblance to that woman, to the relationship he'd abandoned, was undeniable. The timing was right. The age was right. Everything was right. Mr. Obi's voice broke as he said it. He believed Chitty was his son. The son he'd denied before birth. The son he'd left to whatever fate awaited him. And fate had brought him back, not with accusations or demands, but with an act of pure humanity that saved the woman Mr. Obi loved most in the world. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in that room. The child he'd abandoned had saved the life of the wife he'd chosen. Chitty sat there, frozen. Everything he thought he knew about himself, about his origins, about why he'd been abandoned, was shifting. He'd always assumed he wasn't wanted because he wasn't worthy. He'd never imagined there was a man out there, a father, who'd made a choice out of fear rather than cruelty. Mr. Obi offered everything. DNA test to confirm. A home. Education. The medical school Chitty had dreamed about. A future built on the foundation of a mistake being corrected. And Mrs. Adana, still weak but clear-eyed, added her voice. She said she'd known the moment she'd woken up and heard the story. She'd seen it in her husband's face. She could have been angry, could have felt betrayed by this revelation of his past. But instead, she saw it differently. She saw a boy who'd saved her life without knowing who she was, who'd acted out of pure goodness. And she said that kind of character didn't come from privilege. It came from struggle, from choosing to be kind when the world had been unkind. The choice was Chitty's. But it wasn't simple. Accepting meant acknowledging that the years of suffering had been unnecessary. That somewhere, he'd had a father who could have changed everything. It meant forgiving something that felt too big to forgive. But it also meant recognizing something profound. That his mother had raised him with every resource she had, teaching him to be kind, to be strong, to be good, even when the world wasn't good to them. And when she died, she'd left him with something more valuable than money. She'd left him with character. Chitty took the DNA test. The results came back exactly as expected. He was Mr. Obi's son, and he made a choice that surprised everyone. He accepted the opportunity for education, but he asked for something else too. He asked that Mr. Obi fund a scholarship program for other street children. That the lesson of this reunion be shared, not hoarded. That wealth be used to lift up others the way Chitty was being lifted. Mr. Obi agreed. More than that, he understood. His son, the one he'd abandoned, was teaching him how to be a better man, how to turn guilt into purpose, how to transform a mistake into meaning. There's an old saying that what you send into the world eventually finds its way back to you. Mr. Obi sent abandonment and fear into the world, and it came back to him as a young man who embodied everything he should have been, who carried the best of what his mother had given him, and who saved the most precious thing in his father's life. Not for reward, not for recognition, but because he'd learned that being human means showing up when someone needs you, regardless of who they are or what they can give you in return. This story isn't just about a reunion. It's about the choices we make when no one's watching, about the character we build when life strips everything else away, about the fact that sometimes the people we overlook, the ones we consider invisible, are the ones carrying the most light. They built something together, not just a father-son relationship, but a foundation that reached beyond their own story. And Mrs. Adana recovered fully, knowing that her life had been saved not by chance, but by the presence of goodness in a world that often feels dark. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments what part spoke to you the most. What would you have done in Chitty's place? Would you have forgiven? Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to matter, to be seen, to make a difference in a world that keeps spinning regardless of our individual struggles. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one choice, one act of courage or compassion to change not just your own story, but someone else's as well. The question is, will you recognize that moment when it comes? Will you be ready to step forward, even when you have nothing but your own humanity to offer? That's the real question this story leaves us with, and only you can answer it.